Okay. Okay, well, thank you all for attending our little gardening tutorial with natives. With a lot of native presentations, the focus is almost 100% on the plants, but on the individual plants and their characteristics or colors, we're going to talk a little bit more about gardening and maybe some of the things that don't get discussed so much. So to, I think, be successful and have a nice native garden, there are a few things to pay attention to. Some of these are obvious, but you'd be surprised at some of the people with giant IQs that miss some of these things that I've encountered over the years. Like when you plant a plant on a hill, kind of dig out the hill a little bit so when you water, it doesn't go down the hill. This was brought to my attention by two Amgen scientists. So I'm sure both of them, while sleeping, have some multiple of my IQ, but some of these things are obvious to many people, but not to all. So anyway, we'll kind of move ahead. So kind of know your areas, what is sunny, what's shady, and what's in between, and pick the plants accordingly. A lot of the plants are pretty much only sun, some are only shade, and there's a big group of them that are in between that can take some shade and some sun. Next, start thinking about laying your plants out. Lay them out. Here, we'll kind of go back to the first slide. You can see that this is what I did last weekend. You physically put the plants where you think they should go. And look at them from the street. Look at them from inside the house. You'd be surprised at how much it can kind of change. Look at them from the driveway and move them around however you think they should be to give you the look that you want. Transplanting natives doesn't usually work out very well. So wherever you end up, that's where you kind of have to end up. And it really is, like big rule number one. It seems sort of obvious, but the big stuff in back, the little stuff in front, you don't want a big bush in front of the window in most cases. Because if it's in front of the window, you can't see what the garden looks like. I mean, there are clearly some exceptions, and even from the street, unless you want to have sort of a hedge or a screen, which is a different matter, but that's intentional. You want that. So generally speaking, the big stuff is in front, the little stuff, that's big stuff in back, little stuff in front, so you can see over it. Now, once you have the placement and you're happy with where everything is, it's time to start planting. You want to dig the holes to a depth such that when you take the plant out of the pot, the plant sits even with the surrounding soil. You can, if you make an error, you can have the plant up a little higher than the surrounding soil. That's okay. But you really don't want it in it like a depression, because with most native plants, you don't want the water pooling toward the center. So, dig your holes. You can put the plant in the hole in its pot to see if you kind of are digging too far, not far enough. Then fill all the holes up with water. Water the soil you took out of the pot. I would also water the plant in the pot. Let it drain out. Walk away, give it some time. Then it's ready to start. You're ready to start planting. You want to take the plant out of the pot by flipping it upside down. So one hand supports the plant, the other one pushes the pot off from the back. However you do that, you want to do it in such a way that when the pot leaves the plant, it looks like a big Jello mold. And you want to keep that big Jello mold intact as much as possible. You don't want to break it apart. You don't want to move the roots around. You want to gently put it in the hole without breaking the root ball. Some plants you can get away with, making somewhat of a mistake and they'll be fine. Others, it's a big catastrophe if the root ball comes undone. With Matilija poppies, the roots are very, very sensitive to having the root ball come apart. And, pretty much this time of year, you might be able to get away with it, but not for long.
So while you're here, Bob, what do you do if the plant's root bound at this point?
I have yet, it's so seldom that it's really root bound. You can see lots of roots at the bottom. You can see them pushing through the pot. That's okay. It'll grow just fine. You don't really, it would be an odd case like an oak tree that's been in a 1-gallon pot for 2 or 3 years. But you can have plants with lots and lots of roots, like desert mallows will have lots of roots at the bottom. They'll be coming through the pot. It's just fine. So this notion of like encircled roots doesn't seem to be an issue with these, or rarely. I'll put it that way. But don't break it apart. Okay. Next, after you've put the plant in the pot, you take the soil that you put out, or you dug out, put it back around the plant as best you can and firm it in. But be careful not to take the soil that you took out of the pot and put it back on top of the plant. That would be a big no-no. You don't want the top of the plant to be buried under any circumstances with the soil you took out or with mulch. Mulch is a real good idea. I use it at my house. There are all kinds of mulches you can use, but you don't want to put the mulch on top of the plant. You want that to kind of air out, so to speak. You don't want that to be damp where it becomes, where there's lots of mold and things like that and rotting. So put the soil back around the sides of the plant, firm it in. You can firm it in with the back of a shovel. You can firm it in with your foot and give it a big, heavy watering. You want to water down to the roots. Doesn't mean you water just the surface like you're painting the surface. Doesn't mean that you're sitting there for 30 minutes with the garden hose. It's probably a minute or two. If you're not sure if the water's getting down to the roots, for $12, you can go get a moisture meter on Amazon. Water the way you think you should be watering correctly. Put the moisture meter into the ground about 8 inches from the center of the plant the next day. If it says wet, then you've done fine. You're doing a good job. If it says damp, then you probably should have watered a little more. And that's also a good way to kind of test the watering interval. So as a general rule, the first year you're watering down to the roots once a week. But if you're in an area where the soil is very, very, very heavy clay, which is in large parts of Ventura County, maybe stick the moisture meter into the ground at about a week and see what the reading is. But absent that, if you do it once a week, you probably won't have a big problem. And you want to keep that up for the first year. After the first year, you still want to give the plant some supplemental watering, but you cut the frequency way back. You cut it back to maybe twice a month. The reason is that, it doesn't rain in summer here, or generally speaking, very infrequent summer rain. If the plants get some irrigation in summer, they will stay green longer. And if you're watering twice a month, as a general rule, you're not watering so much that you're going to rot them. So they'll look better. And then maybe lastly, or not necessarily lastly, because this could go on and on all night, but note the bloom time of your plants. if you can't miss, the fact that the region is, blooming heavily in spring. As spring passes to summer, there are fewer and fewer plants that are in flower. And if you have only spring blooming plants in your garden, by the time you start rolling into summer and fall, it's going to look like the dry hillsides. Some people think that's fine, that's natural, and they're okay with that. The fire department may disagree with you. I have had that personally happen to me. And I don't think you'll like the look, nor will your neighbors, nor will the flying creatures. So kind of pay attention to the bloom times of the plants. In the center of the Matilija poppies, heavily spring blooming. They bloom from about early April into maybe middle June. If they get some irrigation, you can stretch it out. Some plants bloom multiple times, like on the far right, the right-hand corner, the red buckwheat from the Channel Islands, spring bloomer, but then in summer it kind of rests, and then in fall it blooms again. So there's some plants like that. California fuchsia is a summer through fall through early winter plant. So kind of balance things out. On the left, desert mallows, one of the very, very few plants that will bloom all year. Desert mallows do in fact bloom all year. In the desert, sometimes they get summer water, sometimes they get the monsoons, but as a practical matter in your garden, they bloom heavily in spring. Once they're done flowering and they go to seed, cut them in half. Just take a hand clipper. Don't be shy. Grab and cut, but water them once a week. They will regrow and reflower, and they will repeat that cycle all year, even through winter. So kind of know your plants and sort of schedule things out. So there's always something in bloom. If there's something in bloom, you will always also have flying things in your garden as well, because they eat the nectar and the pollen. And they also eat the leaves, things like, the caterpillars will eat monarch caterpillars eat the leaves. So, you have milkweed, which is, primarily spring blooming. But you have other butterflies too. Now kind of the list of plants. These are some of the plants that are on the online sale. And here are a few of the characteristics. The yarrow, the pink yarrow in the upper left from the Channel Islands, that's one of the things that blooms actually twice a year. It needs more consistent watering than many of the other things, but it's once a week. It's not a twice a week or anything like that, but once a week will keep it green. If you don't water it once a week, it'll die out during the summer. It'll come back a little bit in fall. That's its natural cycle. But to keep it moving and keep it green, once a week makes a big difference. Not necessary to go more than that. They will flower heavily in spring. They will flower again in fall. It's a good plant for bees and butterflies. It's a good for pollinators. And people use it as a lawn replacement as well. Any of the manzanitas, always spring blooming. People look more at the structure, as much or more at the structure than the flowers. But the flowers do feed hummingbirds and bees as well. Bottom left, you might be less familiar with these, except if you lived in Northern California, then you're more familiar with these. This is showy milkweed. Showy milkweed is not native to our county, but you pick it up, I think it's in Monterey County, where you start to pick it up. And then you get it all east of the Sierras into the Great Plains states. Grows really well here, has the normal dormancies, or dormancy as narrowleaf milkweed or any of the other couple of native milkweeds. Flowers are fragrant. They're also really good cut flowers. And the caterpillars eat it just fine. Kind of moving to like the lower middle, Santa Cruz Island buckwheat, just an excellent one for the garden all year. You get flowers basically all year. The flowers go from white to like this rusty brown, excellent cut flowers, easy to grow. You can water it or not water it. It's pretty indestructible. The farthest right, Conejo buckwheat, maybe more interesting, a lot rarer. It only grows pretty much in the Conejo volcanics, so in Thousand Oaks and sections of Thousand Oaks. And I know it blooms a couple other places. I just don't remember off the top of my head where, but basically most of it's centered around Thousand Oaks in sheer rock. So this is something that you want to put in a dry, maybe part shade, but ultimately dry. This is one of those things that once it's established, I would not water it twice a month. I would just forget it.
Okay.
Blooms late in the year and is very consistent. If you've ever been to Wildwood Park in Thousand Oaks, you can see it in many places at the park. And how it grows out of the rock, I'll never know. I mean, I just don't know how it does, but it does. Okay. Any questions on these few plants? Okay. Going.
I have a question.
Sorry, we got, no, go ahead.
I got in there just under the wire.
Yes.
For the Conejo buckwheat, I have a heavy clay soil.
Yeah.
And I love that plant, so I am buying it this time. Do you have any recommendations for how to keep it a little happier?
I would tend to plant it a little higher to give it a little bit better drainage.
Okay.
And once it's established, to establish most things, it's once a week. But to establish something like this, I would go maybe every other week. And then ultimately, maybe in summer, once a month for the first summer, and then forget it and see how that goes. I've seen it at other people's gardens, actually in other gardens that share the same last name. They've had it in their garden for years and it looked great, but then one year it just upped and passed on.
Yeah. You mean Rick?
Yes, that I do.
We're not related.
I know. Yeah. But I've been to his house and his side garden many times. And that's some of the natives will do that. They have a spectrum in which they can do well. And when you get too far out of the spectrum too long, they don't like it. But for many years it grew just fine. Okay. Next page. All right. Upper left, I've mentioned this before. It's a buckwheat from the Channel Islands, commonly known as red buckwheat. Easy to grow. It will take heavy clay soils. I would put it, if you lived in, say, Fillmore, I would put it in part shade. If you live in Ventura, put it all in full sun. Santa Paula, probably put it all in full sun. It's probably just fine. They do flower twice a year. So let them flower in spring and kind of enjoy it. You can use the flowers as cut flowers. The stems elongate to about a foot. Then cut them back and leave it alone, and then they'll go again in fall. So, sort of the bottom center, Galvesia. I can't remember the new name, but
Gamiosa or Gambosa or something.
yes, Snapdragon, but it's from the Channel Islands. Flowers almost all year. Easy to grow. Will take more water or less water. If you're in Ventura, you don't have to water as much. If you're in Fillmore, then maybe twice a month in summer and in part shade, so make some adjustment. But easy to grow. When the flowers look kind of ratty and they're done, take your clipper, just cut them back. cut it in half and leave it alone and they'll grow back and flower. The yucca at the far right, that's on the list. Easy to grow, likes it dry. You can see it all over and just mirror the same conditions, and there's nothing to it.
Can I ask you about that particular? Yeah, I think I put mine in a pot
Oh, okay.
and it didn't do well.
No, they,
Like a
If
big
it's-
pot.
yeah, I know. If it's in a pot, I mean, we grow them in pots too, right?
Mhm.
A decent amount of perlite
Mm,
and water them in their plastic nursery pots maybe every other week. And so the more drainage, the better.
okay.
So maybe a higher portion of sand or perlite, so the water goes right through it. There are a number of plants that you can water more frequently, and they'll actually do better as long as it drains through.
Mm,
All the Pacific Coast irises, we learned the hard way. If you up the percentage of perlite in the pot, you can water more frequently, and that pushes them along a little faster, and they grow a little bigger, a little faster. But if you have regular potting soil, they'll rot. And this is sort of this similar. White sage is similar.
mm.
White sage, we water the white sage in their pots every other week.
Mm. Even through hot weather?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah. And when you have the hot weather, generally they're not capable of using the water.
Mm,
They're going dormant.
okay.
So that's the rationale.
Ah.
Couple of monardellas. The monardellas, maybe favorites, maybe among my favorite. They're the greatest nectar plants. You will get more living things coming to the monardellas than probably anything else. You may not like some of the things that come to them, but you'll have butterflies, you'll have all kinds of bees, bumblebees, carpenter bees, other small native bees, yellow jackets, all kinds of butterflies. The nectar apparently is held up very high in the flower. You also get hummingbirds coming to them too. Similarly to some of the other plants that I mentioned, when they're done flowering and they look like they're going to seed, cut them in half.
Mm,
Cut them in half, they will regrow and flower again until maybe winter, and then they just stop, and start up again in spring. The Rhamnia, the Matilija poppies, terrific. They need space. They can be aggressive. The rap is that their or reputation is that they're hard to start. It ain't so. If you start them this time of year through maybe early winter, they're really easy.
Mhm.
We used to propagate them by root cuttings this time of year, but a lot of the sales of these things are in spring. No matter how much I tell people, this is not the time of year, you should not be doing this. It's a 12, it's a relatively inexpensive item relative to one's filling up, their car with gas. So they do it anyway. It's sort of impulsive, I guess. But this time of year is when you want to plant them. You can water them. They will not rot. So once a week, all through the year, do not worry. You can't hurt them. Even if you watered them twice a week, if they're in heavy clay soil, if it rains a lot, they just keep going. They're excellent cut flowers. Excellent for all kinds of bees. We'll come to them. Fragrant. I can't smell it, but everybody else can. But my nose doesn't smell a lot of things. But fragrant. And you can keep them flowering from middle April through about July if you water them once in a while. Then when they start getting kind of ratty, the leaves will get brown spots on them. It doesn't mean they're dying. That's just what happens to them. It's not a big deal. You can cut them to the ground if you want. The Santa Barbara Botanical Garden will cut them to the ground. I cut mine to the ground also. The new growth comes back very, very quickly. It doesn't grow very tall or very fast, but there's some that comes back and the leaves are clear. They don't have the brown spotting. If you don't cut them back, nothing bad will happen. You can collect the seeds from the seed capsules if you want. But like I said, nothing bad will happen. In nature, nobody cuts them back. You can leave them that way. It's perfectly fine. It's an individual, up to you. Some of the others on the list, a couple of them for shade. The Ribes viburnifolium, upper left, evergreen currant, perfume currant, nice, shiny, dark green foliage all year. The flowers generally aren't much, but this is what the flowers look like in bloom. The underside of the leaf is very, very fragrant. They adapt and become drought tolerant quickly. And they probably need kind of a once-a-year shaping with a hand clipper because they can send up, a weird arching branch or something like that. But that's the maintenance. If you watered them once a month in summer, that's plenty. Lower center, hummingbird sage. You see it if you go hiking, you'll see it in shady areas, oftentimes under oak trees, or in rocky areas in shade, under shade, but usually oak trees are nearby, north facing. Rhizominous, they can spread, not aggressively though. These will also flower twice a year. So if you watered them, if established and you watered them twice a month, they'd flower nicely in spring. In summer, they would go somewhat dormant. And again in fall, they would come back to life. Upper right, black sage grows all on our hills. Once it's established, forget it. There's nothing to do. An excellent one for bees and all kinds of butterflies. Okay. The upper left, Yerba Buena, Satareja, and I can't remember the new name, but it's a ground cover, minty smelling. I am told that some people use it as teas in a tea. Up to you. I never told you that. Okay. But some people, so they say. But it's a good ground cover for shady areas. It does grow in Ventura County in a couple of places. I don't remember offhand where, but I know it does. If you go to Cal Flora, you can find it. A bit of history. San Francisco's first name was Yerba Buena. Yep. Bottom center, Solidago. These spread rhizominously. Excellent summer flowering. So if you want to space things out, so some of the garden is blooming in summer, this would be a good addition. Finally, the Trichostema Midnight Magic. The Trichostema that you see on the hills, the most common kind, is very difficult to grow in a garden. California has a couple of types, I think 3 types of different Trichostema that grow in the state. One of them is an annual, common name vinegar weed, which you see pop up. But our woolly blue curl that you see on the hills is difficult. If you water it too much in winter, it'll die. The trick is in summer, you want to water it no more than once a month. It's going to look kind of burnt out, so the temptation is to water it more often. But the hybrid takes garden conditions fairly well. It's an easy one to grow. It's a cross between our linatum and one from Mexico, I believe. And it's relatively easy to grow and blooms most of the year, heavily in spring, but it's blooming now. Okay, so we gotta be getting close. Okay. Getting close to the end. The one on the left is probably a new one for everybody here. Teucrium glandulosum grows in the deserts in San Bernardino. Flowers almost all year. Flowers all year as far as I know. I haven't seen a period of time when it doesn't. It's an excellent one for bees. It seems to like full sun, and maybe if you were in Simi Valley, part shade, but it seems to do well in full sun in the nursery, and it gets pretty hot during the summer. It can handle more water. We water once a week. Doesn't seem to stop it. It seems to grow really well. I have some in my yard, transplanted it, root, shocked out, came right back.
Hmm.
So not a whole lot of whites in gardening. Size-wise, maybe 1.5 feet by about the same. So a more modest size. So that's definitely one to think about. Easy to grow. The verbena, you're probably mostly familiar with, or all of you are probably familiar with. The verbena lilacina, long flowering period, cut it back, will flower again, easy to grow, takes a wide range of conditions. It seems to do better in part shade. So if you're in, say, Thousand Oaks, part shade would be better. If you're in Santa Paula, maybe part shade would be better. If you're in Ventura, full sun is just fine. And like a lot of these things, when they're done flowering, just shear them back. They'll regrow and flower again. Excellent one for bees and butterflies. And lastly on the list, since we're in the V section of the alphabet, Vitis Rogers Red. This is a native grape hybrid, actually. But the significant thing about this is, well, it's a cross between Vitis californica and a French wine grape, the name I forget, but from Sonoma County. Leaves turn bright red in fall. They will turn absolutely fire engine red. It can be fairly aggressive. So once a year with a hand clipper, you cut it where you don't want it and call it even. They will also produce grapes. Personally, I like the grapes. I eat the grapes. Of all the things, when people, as you can imagine, people come to the nursery and they want things that they can eat. That's a big no-no for me. I don't get involved in that because all I need is somebody to have an allergic reaction to one of these things, and then it's a giant mess. But this one I do. And we have had people asking if they can eat the mushrooms. I mean, just so you know. Okay. Coming to an end.
All right.
Okay.
Um,
Questions? And then
are you gonna play a video, Bob? Sorry.
I'm gonna play a video.
Okay, all right,
This-
I'll wait.
This is a video about survival. That is, I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it?
Yeah,
Because, okay, good, because
The cat,
I
the
have,
butterfly.
yeah. That's the family cat. That was a monarch, as you can see, on showy milkweed. And nature's weird, but it all comes to equilibrium. Anyway, are there any other questions?
I'm sure there will be. First of all, I want to ask everybody if you can see my answers in the chat. Somebody asked about the poppies.
Yeah, I can see everything in the chat that you've been putting in.
Okay, all right, thank you. Cool, thanks. Okay, so we'll open it. I think maybe we have a lot of people here, 23. Just go ahead and speak up maybe, rather than raising your hand. If you have questions. Anyone? I'll ask something. Because I never know when to prune stuff. And I just tend to leave the seed heads on probably too long.
Yeah,
Should I pinch those off?
yeah, can be a difficult question. You got to find
Salvias.
out, yeah, you got to kind of find out which plants. In most cases, you can prune when it looks like it needs a haircut.
Okay.
Like I need a haircut, I need a pruning. But it's like when most things look like it, like when the sages are done and they look ratty, you can cut them back a third and you'll be just fine. The Matilija poppies, when the leaves are all blotchy, they have like brown spots, you can cut them down to the ground and it's just fine. California fuchsia, when they're done flowering, you can cut them down 2/3, also just fine. Where you get into kind of an area where you should do maybe less pruning, would be things like ceanothus.
Mm.
Ceanothus does not like to be pruned, and so you would prune the tips in the area where you don't want them to be. Fremontodendron is also one with a big no-no.
Hmm.
So because all kinds of bacteria gets into the cut, and they're very sensitive to that. So the Fremontodendron, that's one that you don't water also in summer. Once you plant it and it's established, you don't come back. It's on its way. You don't cut it, you don't touch it. You just sort of leave it alone. But I think mostly when it looks like it needs it, you can do it, cut it back between a third and half, and you're good.
Okay.
Things like the mallows can't hurt them. Go ahead, cut them back. If they need it, they'll regrow and flower again.
Okay. And then I have one more question. So I have a bladder pod in my yard and it was doing great until this even it made it through the heat dome. And then now it appears to have died, but I cracked one of the stems and it's still green inside. Do you think
That's
it's
fine.
just shocked or something?
Yeah, I think
Or-
in this time of year, they start to slow down.
Okay.
And
So
so
cut it.
yeah, you can cut it, you can do
Okay.
whatever, but you can cut it. That's fine. They'll come back. They should come
Okay.
back from the base.
Okay.
But that's the test. I mean, it seems like a simple test. You just sort of scrape away the edge
Right.
and the outer covering of
Yeah.
the stem. And if it's green inside, you're pretty much in good shape. But yeah,
Okay.
with bladder pods, they'll tend to look kind of ratty this time of year.
Okay. I thought I may have overwatered it, so maybe not.
Not necessarily. Yeah.
Okay. I tend to kind of think about where they occur naturally and figure like the euchera, like they like seeps and shade, so
Yeah.
they can take more water and I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's right.
So Bob, I have a bunch of questions because you just
Okay.
taught me a lot of things that I think are going to be really helpful to make my garden look more beautiful. Up until now, I have about a almost 4-year-old native garden, and everything in my mind is doing fine. But I am the stingiest when it comes to water. I haven't watered anything for basically for the whole year, and my plants look fine. Now I am in Ventura, and I do have a heavy clay soil. And I like your idea of, clipping back, deadheading basically, and clipping back to get a second bloom, which I have not had. But is there any reason to not, if I want to just go for, more stingy, less showy, perhaps?
Yeah, that's fine. If that's what if you're happy with the look, then that's perfectly fine. I mean, if you look at the hillsides, they don't get summer water,
Right.
and so you're just following along with that sequence. But a lot of the plants will benefit from it. But for instance, things like yarrow, they won't bloom in fall. But in nature they don't, they don't. In nature they don't, and so that's fine.
Yeah, so actually, I have both common and island yarrow, and they are still blooming.
Oh,
And
okay.
they
Mine is
are
too.
beautiful and green, but I really think it's because it's, where they're planted.
It
Because
could
I
be.
am in Ventura, it's pretty shady where they are, and I have clay soil, but
Could well be. I can tell you, like with the mallows, because we sell a lot of mallows because they're always in bloom and they're very, very easy to grow. Uh, if you don't water them, they'll look dried out and they won't flower again till spring, but they're not
Mhm.
dead.
right.
And so if you're happy with that look, like the buckwheat, it looks great when you don't water it. I really like the chocolatey looking flower heads. I mean, I think that's very attractive. So it's, it becomes a personal choice.
Okay, but I'm not harming my plants by being stingy, as I said.
No, you won't be taken to court. You're fine.
I don't want to harm my plants. I mean,
plant-
I hope they live for a really long time, but I prune as you've suggested. I mean, this time of year, I prune a lot of things pretty heavily, and then they come back gorgeous in spring. So,
Sure. That doesn't sound like a case of plant abuse to me.
thanks, Bob.
Sure. Yeah, I
I
know.
needed that pat on the back.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right. Other questions?
I have a question. I have different natives and most of them grow pretty large and I love that. But if I wanted something for like a smaller border, do you have any recommendations of something that doesn't grow as large as like sages and most of our native plants, something that's more just a smaller kind of plant for a border?
There are such a huge list of plants. On this list here that we went through, the red buckwheat is one that comes to mind right away without kind of scrolling through. The red buckwheat gets to be maybe 1.5 feet by about the same. So there are a whole series of plants, that would provide a border that are smallish.
Yeah, how about any like grasses that also are just I'm just trying to think of I have an area where I want to kind of just delineate and I just want to add like a line of different plants, but I don't want it to grow so big that it just kind of overpowers the space.
How tall do you want them?
The height doesn't really matter so much, it's more the width.
Oh, the width is and how wide?
I can be flexible, but I'm just trying to look for smaller, um,
Two
not
feet?
I
One,
sure. Yeah.
again, the buckwheat, the red buckwheat gets to be not even 2 feet. You can put in, I'm just trying to think of,
I have fescue, Idahoan
yeah,
maize, however you say it, and
Okay.
that's a beautiful little plant for a border.
I
Nice.
was
Hmm.
I was just going towards the grasses. That's right. The Canyon Prince gets taller,
Yeah.
but the grasses can spread widthwise, but you can certainly control them. Blue-eyed grass is also an excellent one for something of that size, where you want like a border.
Yeah. Also, sorry, also if it's full sun, definitely full sun, like
Definitely.
south facing.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, it would have to be something that's okay in full sun, like a south facing garden area.
Are you getting? I'm not getting all
Oh,
that.
she needs to tolerate full sun.
Yeah. Blue-eyed grass will, either the buckwheat or the blue-eyed grass will tolerate full sun. That's not a problem. I'm just trying to think if there are other buckwheats. The Conejo buckwheat is a little more tricky. I'm sure, there are. I'm trying to take my brain into the nursery and kind of going back up and down the rows to see if I can,
Mm.
see things.
Does deer grass get too big?
Deer grass can get kind of good size. Yeah. Yeah.
Mine's getting huge.
Yeah. The yarrow will work out fine. The yarrow can be a little spready, but you can control that very easily. That does not get real big, and that's a good perennial border as well, I think.
Sounds good. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, sure. Okay, are we?
Blanca, I just stuck a note in the chat for you too.
Mr. Bob, it's Dean. How are you?
Hey, hey,
Hey,
Dean. Hey, what up?
I have a number of things that just sort of fit for me. You know, I'm the one who buys the Matilija poppy out of season, and you told me, you know, you're not going to get success with this baby. Throw it in the ground, and of course, it did exactly as you said it would. It sat there and looked annoyed with me for a better part of a year and a half, and finally came around. Didn't have a phenomenal bloom, but I'm expecting, you know, greater success as we go into next year.
Oh, it'll go. But
Yeah, I figured as much.
I know you bought a
Back
lot
to
of.
the peritoma, the bladder pod. Is that the worst name ever for such a nice plant? Bladder pod. Anyhow, the peritoma. How aggressive can I cut that back? It gets kind of leggy.
Yeah,
Right now, I've got
yeah.
some that's blooming for the third
Yeah.
time for the year. But what do you thoughts?
Off with their heads. Yeah, yeah. Go for it. And I know you also bought a lot of the Aquilegia eximia from us too, which is a terrific one. It's a late flowering columbine that does really, really well, and it blooms in summer. So in terms of like balancing out the bloom time, um, that's a good one for summer blooming. But yeah, you don't be afraid to use the hand clipper.
It with the Midnight Magic, your Ticostoma. Will it tolerate transplanting? Do you suppose? I've got one that I've overplanted here that needs to be brought, probably gifted to somebody, or at least gotten out from where it's at. Will it tolerate movement?
They usually don't like it. They usually aren't real successful. But if you're going to do it, then do it kind of this time of year. So cut the foliage, the green growth like in half, and try and dig it up with as much soil as you can. And then are you going to like put it in a different spot in your garden?
I may try to pot it up and see if I can, bestow it on somebody if it survives to the pot. I have so much I love the plant so darn much, but I've got abundance.
You got too many. Okay. Yeah,
I'll take it, Dean.
okay. There you go. You got a buyer. Give it a shot. And if it doesn't work out, I got a few. Don't worry.
So then I'm hearing that a good rule of thumb is to cut back in the fall.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cut back in the fall and winter.
For something, not, I guess, for.
Ceanothus and Fremontodendrons are kind of the exception, I think.
Okay.
They're always more.
Okay.
The Tricostoma, I think my speakers cut out when I think you were going to say that it was a cross with something. Did you say something about it?
Yeah.
What was it? I missed it.
Yeah, Patty. The Tricostoma that we sell, that other places sell, native nursery, Santa Barbara Botanical Garden as well, is a cross between our, linatum that you would see in the hills and one from Mexico. I believe it was a Suncrest Garden creation, so to speak. It is much more tolerant to garden conditions than the one that you would see in the hills, which can be problematic. I see some people seem to have pretty good success. I was walking, this is maybe a month ago at the Ventura Botanical Garden. Like, how do they get these things to look so nice this time of year? This looks really good. In a combination of, limiting the irrigation frequency in the soil. And Tree of Life would say, if you water it, I want to say like once a month, you'll be fine. And maybe so. But it's called Midnight Tricostoma Midnight Magic. And you can look it up and see what you think. It's much more tolerant to garden conditions, and in hot areas like Ojai or Simi Valley, it actually benefits from a weekly watering in summer.
I've got one and it hasn't been getting enough water. But
Yeah.
in an area that's hard for me to get to.
Right. Right.
I'll give it some.
It's
Okay,
on, it's on the list again.
Yeah.
o- Okay, are we,
Any
Go.
more questions or you? Well, we know where to find you.
I've heard that
In the
before.
beer garden on Saturday
Okay, very good.
after 2:00.
Okay,
2:30.
very good. Well,
All right. Well,
thanks for spending your evening with
yeah, thanks,
us.
Bob.
And
Thanks, Bob. That was really great. Thanks so
Okay,
much.
my pleasure. Bye,
All right.
lots of
Thank you,
friends.
Bob.
Okay. Hey,
Maybe see you Saturday.
okay, great. Take care. Bye, Dean.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay,
Bye.
my pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.